Trump and Kamala Harris in the fray. It's a tight battle. Let's take a look at the headlines.
The good news is that Kamala Harris doesn't have concepts of a plan. She got a plan to make your life better.
Former United States President Barack Obama and superstar rocker Bruce Springsteen come out in support of the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris at the Georgia campaign rally.
Lion Kamala Harris.
Republican candidate Donald Trump compares the United States to garbage can in a diatribe against immigration at a rally in Arizona. Former model Stacey Williams alleges that the former president and the Republican candidate Donald Trump groped her in the 1990s after the late sexual abuser Jeffrey Epstein introduced them. A controversial bronze poop sculpture atop the former Speaker Nancy Pelosi's desk appears across the street from the US Capitol in a dig at former President Donald Trump and the rioters that stormed the Capitol in January 2021. Latest polls predict a mixed bag. While the Wall Street Journal and Forbes put Trump ahead of Harris in the latest surveys, Harris continues her lead in Ipsos and 538 polls. Democrat Kamala Harris to team with pop star Beyonce for a rally in Texas. Meanwhile, Donald Trump will be in Michigan making his final pitch to America. Now, with just 11 days remaining in the race for the White House, Vice President Kamala Harris and the former President Donald Trump are intensifying their campaigns in the key battleground states. Harris joined Barack Obama yesterday on the trail in Georgia, rallying support in Atlanta suburbs, while Harris has underscored her commitment to health care as a right and to defending reproductive freedoms. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign in Arizona spotlighted his hardline immigration policies, even proposing severe penalties for migrant-related crimes. Trump's speech is resonating with some voters, especially on the economic issues, with the new Financial Times polls showing him now the trusted slightly more than Harris on handling the economy. Now, as election day nears, both the candidates and their running mates are pushing hard across the swing states, aiming to secure every possible vote. And the two candidates vying for the White House are taking a break from targeting votes in the battleground states today to campaign in Texas. Here's a report.
With 2 weeks remaining in the US presidential race, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are racing to secure votes in key battleground states.
I'm not going to answer the question.
The election was initially a rematch of 2020, but it was upended in July when President Joe Biden ended his campaign and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. The big question now is, will America get its first woman president or a second Donald Trump term? In her most recent rally, Vice President Kamala Harris appeared with Barack Obama for the first time on the campaign trail. The two of them offered closing arguments targeting black voters in Atlanta's eastern suburbs, a vibrant, symbolic part of Georgia.
Ours is a fight for the future, and it is a fight for freedom. For freedom, like the fundamental freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do.
Harris said she believes healthcare should be a right and not just a privilege for those who can afford it, and said Trump would gut the Affordable Care Act and roll back the $35 cap on insulin.
I will give middle-class tax cuts to 100 million Americans, including $6,000 during the first year of a child's life, that will also lift America's children out of poverty.
The Democratic nominee also reaffirmed her support for abortion rights, referring to the death of Amber Nicole Thurman, a Georgia woman whose death was recently found to be a result of the state's abortion ban. Obama directed his ire at Trump and his general incompetence.
I mean, have you seen Donald Trump lately? He out there giving 2-hour speeches, just word salad. Said the other day, January 6th was a day of love, he said that. Like it was Woodstock or Coachella. If your grandpa was acting like this, you'd call up your brother, call up your cousin, and you say, hey, have you noticed Grandpa? He acting kind of funny right now.
I get up in the evening.
The campaign brought rock legend Bruce Springsteen to join her and to warm up the crowd.
Come home in the morning, and I won't forget the name.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump, campaigning in the border swing state of Arizona on Thursday, called the country a garbage can because of immigration policies under the Biden administration.
We're like a garbage can. You know, it's the first time I've ever said that. And every time I come up and talk about what they've done to our country, I get angrier and angrier. First time I've ever said garbage can, but you know what? It's a very accurate description.
His speech started on a menacing message about migration, a key theme for the Trump re-election bid, in what campaign officials have cast as his final pitch to voters, that Harris broke the country and Trump will fix it, according to Fox News. He laid out a host of policies aimed at migrants, invoking the death penalty.
All right, so all that is happening in the last 12 hours in the United States of America, particularly in terms of the rallies and the attacks and counterattacks happening between the two Republicans and the Democrats. It's an interesting development, and it keeps the viewer and the voters of America engrossed. And it remains to be seen who's going to win the election. But I'm going to bring in speakers on the telecast with me. I have with me Colonel Grant Newsham. He's a retired U.S. Marine Colonel and a foreign affairs commentator. Thank you very much for joining me. I also have with me Scott Faulkner, who's the former Chief Administration Officer at the U.S. House of Representatives. I have Raymond Vickery Jr. He's the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast. I start my conversation with you, Colonel Newsham, about what is your perception, especially the last 24 hours, the campaign that has obviously gained crescendo, and there have been attacks and counterattacks, but the celebrity star power that Kamala Harris has gotten, is this going to make impact for her in a positive way come 5th of November?
Well, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference at this point. The voting has already started. A lot of people have already cast their votes, and I think the information's been out there. I think most people have probably made up their minds by now. This has certainly been one of the weirdest campaigns that I've ever seen in my lifetime. You see a sort of an air of desperation in parts of it, but there's a hatred that one notes that almost resembles 30 years war kind of hatred. But I say it's a very unusual election. The way Vice President Harris was put into as the candidate, well, that's something that I've never seen. I don't think anyone has. And there's certainly been a real lack of interest in understanding exactly how that decision was made on the part of the media. Additionally, there were millions of people who voted for President Biden to be the candidate. Apparently their votes didn't count, and we just had that sudden switch. So this is something I've never seen, plus 2 assassination attempts on President Trump, and one of them missed by the closest fraction of distance that you can imagine. If he had been killed, who knows what would have happened to the country. But this is something that's very, very unusual, and it's really going to be something that's going to keep a lot of us sort of wondering exactly what's next. Hopefully we'll get through this, but as I say, I've never seen anything like this.
Okay, let's take a look at all the poll numbers that are coming in. Now, the latest polls, it has been a mixed bag, but up until now, majority of these polls were giving Kamala Harris the edge. And suddenly, in the last 24 hours, whether it is the Financial Times vote or we talk about the Wall Street Journal and there are some other votes, the Forbes vote, the Forbes poll, they've all put Donald Trump, who's edging past Kamala Harris with about a point or 2 points. The margin may be very minuscule, but he seems to be moving forward, especially what do you think may have worked, or what are these poll projections implying?
One can take the polls as they are. I think the polls that really matter are not the national ones, but rather the polls in the 7 battleground states, the swing states, that could go either way. And the polls appear to be within the margin of error, which means that you or I could make as good a guess as the pollsters can. But it does show that it is going to be very close. I think depending on which side one supports in a race, there's a sort of a incredulity that anybody would vote for the other side. But that's been the case in the US for at least 25 years, where it does seem to be split fairly evenly down the sort of the population. So these are going to be very close once again.
There's also this sentiment, these reports going around that there has been support of black men that Trump has been getting in the recent days. If that's true, and if he's able to woo the black voters, who primarily have been voting for Democrats over the past several years and decades, what do you think must be working for Trump, especially in his bid to attract their voters?
Well, whatever he's saying seems to be working, if the polls are to be believed. This is certainly a constituency which he has not gotten much support from in the past. There's also evidence that in the Hispanic population, that a good chunk of that is going to President Trump as well. That's something that is new, and we'll find out. It's certainly something that works in his favor if it does come to pass.
Do you think foreign policy is something that the average American at this point of time is considering when he casts his vote, whether it is the Ukraine war or the West Asia crisis?
I think people like me do, but I'm not sure that most people do. I think that a lot of people vote for sort of based on their personal circumstances, their job, how much money they have. Can they take care of their children? Can they afford groceries? Can they fill up their car? That's, I think, what motivates most people when they vote in the United States. In fact, it is interesting just how little the foreign affairs, China, Ukraine, Middle East, has come up during this campaign. And that is, it's a little unusual because it usually gets more mention than that. But in this case, it's striking by its absence. And as I said, most people don't vote on foreign affairs. At least that's been my observation over the years. I say I often do, but I'm not sure that too many other people do.
Right, absolutely, because there were these targeted jibes at Kamala Harris talking about how young she is, even though she's 60, but when it comes to the veterans like Biden and Trump, she's way younger, a couple of decades younger than they are, and Trump has been time and again saying that the way Kamala Harris has been campaigning, there has not been a single new innovative idea or a campaign that Kamala Harris has been able to furbish. She has been working in the shadow of her president, who's Joe Biden. So she doesn't bring anything new to the table.
Well, that's a fair argument. One can see how well she's done, how well she's produced, what she's been responsible for, what she's achieved, and that is not readily apparent. I would say I've never seen a candidate run for office and try to avoid the press the way Vice President Harris has. This is something very unusual, and it's not a coincidence. There's probably a reason why they don't want her in front of the press, but this is something that goes to the fundamental nature of a fair election, a free election. Is you want the voting public to be as informed as possible when one candidate does everything they can to stay away from the press, from having their positions, their experiences put out for display, that it's a very unhealthy thing for democracy, and it's extremely troubling the way that they have, in fact, avoided the press and almost tried to run out the clock. It seems it's really not fair to the voters not to have a good look at who exactly she is. But I would note that Mr. Trump's energy is impressive, to put it mildly, not least after having come within a hair's breadth of being killed and he's just back on the campaign trail, and he's going to rallies, talking to everybody, talking to the press as well, and it's really something to behold. He's 80 years old, or almost 80 years old, and seems to have the energy of about a 23-year-old.
Okay, that has been an allegation, that has been an attack on Kamala Harris for this. Why does she not give more press interviews? Why is she not as accessible as Donald Trump is? But the point is that ever since that criticism hit home, she has been giving these press interviews. She has been doing these rallies. She has been attending these town halls and addressing the public. And to add things to Kamala Harris's argument, she was the one who was encouraging Donald Trump to have the third presidential debate, the second one with her. But it was Donald Trump who said he was not keen to do so.
Well, actually, she started to be a little more accessible after the voting has already started and people have already made their decisions. Plus, it's really much too late in the process to jump in here. And once again, there's a reason why you keep a candidate away from the media, and it's generally not a good reason. As far as an extra debate, well, I had been watching these for a while, and if I was a Republican, I wouldn't get anywhere near one, the way that they are set up against the Republican candidates. I mean, that's, if it was being done to a Democrat candidate, what saw happen to Mr. Trump and J.D. Vance as well, I would be very upset about that.
Okay, talking about, you touched upon the subject of economy, and it is very important for an average American to fight inflation, to be able to earn his livelihood, to be able to have a better lifestyle, and if pollsters are to be believed in terms of the projections they make, Trump has been trumping ahead and leaving Kamala Harris behind when it comes to the subject of economy. It seems as if the people of America are more trustful of Trump in handing over the country and its state of affairs when it comes to the economy.
Well, they ought to be. All you have to do is go into the grocery store and see what things cost, or go fill up your car with gasoline. Look at your rent, look at mortgage rates. By any measure, if you look back 4 years, things were better then. Ronald Reagan successfully used that pitch as well. Were you better off 4 years ago than you are now? But this is just, it's part of the game, and it's surprising that the Republicans have not made more of this. I think that was a failing in their strategy, because it is something that does hit every person individually, and it hits everyone unless you've got a lot of money. But for most Americans, the state of the economy, and particularly inflation costs, are out of control. And they don't want to hear, well, it's somebody else's fault. Ultimately, the person who gets the blame are the people who've been running the administration. But this is something that is very hard to argue against, as I see it.
Okay, and also, it was in July when President Joe Biden stepped down from the race of the presidential elections, race to the White House. It was Kamala Harris that replaced him, and her ratings, her approval ratings skyrocketed. They were much higher than Donald Trump. Do you think the country is now ready for a first American president, and mind you, first American black president?
Well, I thought Barack Obama was a black president.
Woman black president.
Well, we've been ready for one for a long time, and there's female candidates who, if they had run, would have had a very good chance. I don't consider it all that big a deal. People, I hope, look at the capabilities of a candidate, but I don't see that this is being earth-shattering just by virtue of what her background is. America's been ready for this for a long time. Look at this. We've had Colin Powell. We just go down the list. We've had any number of minorities who've reached the very highest levels in our system. So this is, to me, this is not something that really matters much. You look at the capabilities, the qualities of a candidate. You look at how well they've performed throughout their careers when they've been in positions of responsibility, and you make your decisions based on that. It's simply not a question of the hue of sort of one's skin or one's sort of ethnic background.
Okay, all right. Stay on with me. Colonel Grant. I'm also being joined right now by Captain James Fannell. Thank you very much, sir. And my first question about what do you make of the latest poll results? Many of them have pitted Donald Trump ahead of Kamala Harris.
Well, I think the biggest difference in this election for the Republican Party is the fact that they're now voting early with the ability to vote early in many of these states, especially the key battleground states, which was something that the Republican Party had not previously done in 2022 in the congressional elections or previous presidential elections in 2020 or before, because of the traditional view of most Republicans was that, there's a single day to vote and you vote in person on that day. And after what happened in 2020 with voting machines malfunctioning on voting day and not enough ballots in certain places and things of that nature, the Republican Party decided that it was in their best interest if the law was going to allow for early voting, that the Republicans should do that. And I think what you're seeing is a result of a lot of Republican voters that are supporting Trump coming out now, and they're a lot more vocal about speaking up for Donald Trump.
Right, absolutely. Stay on with me, Captain James Fannell. I'm also being joined by Scott Faulkner. He is the former Chief Administration Officer at the U.S. House of Representatives. Mr. Faulkner, your perception of how this campaigning for the Republicans and the Democrats is trudging along?
Well, if it was a rational world, Trump would be winning by a landslide, but it is not a rational world. We have 94% of the American media is totally being a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party and of the Kamala Harris campaign. And unfortunately, a lot of voters may only be exposed to that propaganda. So that's why the race is tight. Thankfully, as one of your other guests just said, Republicans, after decades of not doing the right thing, are finally voting early. And they've already exceeded the numbers of Democrats in Florida and in Georgia, and that's a good thing. But we still have a few days left. There's the lies that are coming forward to attack Trump. They're bringing up that he's a Nazi and a fascist and all that. And unfortunately, unless you're watching Fox News or watching or following conservative social media, the truth is not coming out to a lot of voters. So this election is not over yet. Kamala Harris is a chronic liar. I mean, she's lied about everything, including her own demographics. She's lied about her entire career. She's lied about everything in her policies. Her running mate has lied about his entire career. Those lies seem to be permeating parts of the electorate, and that's why this election is still close.
Okay, talking about the attacks and the counter-attacks. Now, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, there have been the former chief of staff of Donald Trump when he was the president, call him fascist, a dictator. Do you think this sentiment is resonating with the average American as well?
I think it's resonating in certain parts. I was actually on the phone last night with somebody because I just voted yesterday. We have early voting here in West Virginia, and they're a very knowledgeable person. They were going on and on about how could I vote for Trump? He's a Nazi. He's a fascist. He'll be the dictator. He'll bring in the military to go after Americans. I mean, so there are people out there who truly believe that. I mean, he had been president for 4 years. We didn't have a dictatorship under Trump. We've had far more attacks on individuals and political opponents under the current Biden-Harris administration.
Okay, talking about domestic politics versus foreign affairs, public policy, foreign policy. Now, there has been a lot of conversation happening and reports pouring in that Kamala Harris might not be the right fit because she doesn't have the experience. She has been working under the shadow of Joe Biden, and she's not gotten anything on the table as her portrayal as the next president of America. But do you really think it really matters in domestic politics, whether what's happening in Ukraine or in West Asia or with China?
Very few American elections pivot on foreign policy. I mean, 1968 is probably a perfect example because of the Vietnam War, but otherwise, and certainly 2004 and the aftermath of 9/11 and the counterterrorism efforts. But otherwise, most Americans vote their pocketbook, as they say. And as one person said a couple elections ago, it's the economy, stupid. And Americans are hurting. The inflation rate, I mean, things are anywhere from 20 to 30% more than they were 4 years ago at the store. And so people see that. And people see Trump as a person who oversaw low inflation, oversaw high employment, and saw a booming American economy until COVID hit. So he leads by large margins on those issues, and that probably is what will bring him across the finish line.
But also the popular perception that Kamala Harris is the candidate who is rooting for the middle class, while Donald Trump, with his corporate tax cuts and other initiatives, is only pitching for the wealthy of the country.
Well, again, this is where, you know, reality and rhetoric are two different worlds at the moment. That if you look at who benefited the most under the 4 years of Trump versus who's benefited the most under the 3.5 years of Biden-Harris, the middle class benefited far more under Trump. His tax cuts were far better for the middle class. His proposals to not tax Social Security payments, to not tax tips, to not tax overtime for first responders. I mean, these are huge issues. I mean, the fact that many unions in America are either endorsing Trump or not endorsing anyone is unheard of. And these are indications that once you get out of the media filter, which is totally left-wing in this country, the reality is a lot of people are falling in line behind Trump because they see him as their future.
But taking a look at the economy in the last 4 years, obviously the world and United States of America have faced the burden of COVID. You know, the inflation is now under control in America. The GDP is coming back to normalcy. There have been several Fed cuts, but that has not impacted the way economy is functioning. Should the issue of COVID also be kept into consideration when you are judging the economy, the state of affairs when Biden administration was in power? Because COVID was an anomaly. It's a calamity that has happened, and nobody had control over it.
Well, the key is here that inflation is not under control. I mean, the fact is that prices are still going up. They're just going up at a lower rate, in part because, again, you know, if you have a $10 bill and it goes up by $1, you know, that's 10% inflation. If you have a $100 bill and it goes up by $2, that's a 2% inflation. So the fact that prices are much higher than they were 4 years ago, and the inflation rate really is not the case. Really not relevant because it's being put against a much higher amount of money to begin with. People go to the store and they know what they were able to spend a year ago or even 3 years ago on a basket of food and what they're having to spend now. And it's dramatically higher, especially for very specific goods. People see that. They vote their pocketbook. And that's the one hope that Trump has, is that people are going to see the economy for what it is. The statistics are always fake. I mean, the number of times the Biden-Harris administration has had to readjust employment numbers, unemployment numbers, even inflation numbers. I mean, they play with the numbers. And so therefore the numbers that are put out by the federal government are always suspect.
Okay, so why do you think Donald Trump's immigration policies and the campaign that he is revolving around immigration and talking about how these immigrants eat the cats and dogs and pets of Americans, why is it resonating with the people?
Actually, if you look at some of the polling, he is trusted far more than Harris on the whole issue of immigration. Again, let's divide it down. No one in America is against immigration. People, I mean, we're all immigrants, but illegal immigration, and that's the and that's where the Democrats and the media keep conflating, that they try to lump it all together and say we're against immigrants. No, illegal immigrants, people who are already breaking the law by being in this country. We have gangs, the Agua group out of Venezuela, the MS-13 out of the Central America. I mean, you have gang activity. I mean, I live here in West Virginia, a fairly rural state. We have MS-13 happening right here. We have human trafficking happening right here. We have drugs and fentanyl happening right here. The border is now all 50 states because these gangs, I mean, what happens is people come across the border, they pay money for the cartels to bring them across the border, and then the cartels require them to pay that money back. So the gang members are in the enforcers to the other people to say, you haven't paid yet, go and shoplift. You haven't paid back, put your wife or your daughter into human trafficking. You haven't paid, become a drug dealer. I mean, these are things that are happening every day. Crime is going through the roof. Gang activity is going through the roof. And so these are things that are affecting Americans, and they trust Trump more than Harris on this.
Okay, all right. On that note, I thank you, Scott Faulkner, and I thank you, Colonel Grant Newsham, for joining me on the telecast and sharing your views. On that note, let's also take a look at what the numbers at this point in time are projecting. Now, there have been several polls. There are at least a dozen or more of these polls that are reflecting these numbers and changing them, week after week. And as per the latest figures, and there you have it. This is as per the Wall Street Journal. Kamala Harris is behind Trump. She's at 45%. Approval rating for Trump have now risen to 47%. Now, this is quite the difference from the last 2 days when Trump was trailing Harris in the Wall Street Journal poll. Let's take a look at the second poll, which has also given Trump the edge against Kamala Harris, and this is this is 538 ABC News, which has once again put Trump behind Kamala Harris at 46.4%, Kamala Harris at 48.1%. So I wouldn't say that's a comfortable margin, but that's a margin nonetheless, which is in favor of Kamala Harris. We have the third poll over here, Harris X Forbes poll that has released its numbers in the last 12 hours, and Trump is at 49%, Kamala Harris at 48%. So a very slim margin by which Donald Trump is winning this poll in the Forbes result that has come out. And then we have Fox News. Fox News has also given Trump not a comfortable but just a 2 percentage point margin win against Kamala Harris, with 50% and the latter getting 48%. So now that we have the numbers, I'm going to bring in my other set of guests. I'm going to discuss with them numbers, and most particularly about what are the key issues that the people of America at this point of time are bogged by, and who do they think and their campaigns are going to bring about a difference in their lives, bring about a difference in economy, bring about a difference in the immigration problems that the country is facing. On the telecast with me, let's get in Mr. Raymond Vickery Jr. He's the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Like I said, joining me also on the telecast is Captain James Fannell. I'll start with you, Mr. Vickery, about the state of affairs. What do you make of the campaign right now? Most importantly, we have taken a look at how Kamala Harris has been bringing in star power. There has been Beyonce, there has been, of course, Bruce Springsteen, who have been campaigning for her. Does this impact the voters' decision?
I think it's a dead heat. You can see polls on both sides, and as we know, polls have been wrong. So the polls missed it in 2016, they missed it again in 2020, but what's important, of course, is it's showing that it's in the range of victory for either party. So that's the real situation, and one should not conclude that Trump has won already.
Now, what are the key issues, according to you, for an average American when he goes out to vote?
think the basic issues are pretty well known. Trump has emphasized immigration very heavily. There is inflation, particularly at the grocery store, which has cut against Kamala Harris. Trump is an entertainer, and there is, of course, the implication of running against a woman, particularly a black woman, which is raised surreptitiously at all times. On the Democratic side, I think there's no question that the defense of democracy is a very salient point. So many of the Trump administration, his leading advisors have said that he is a fascist, that he has an authoritarian streak, and will try to rule without the usual constraints of democracy. So that's a salient point. Abortion is also very much at the forefront, particularly for many, many women. And indeed, Trump's treatment of women verbally and actually in terms of accosting them is a very salient point.
Right, absolutely. Now, as we were talking about the polls and their projections that Americans trust Trump more than Harris when it comes to the country's economy, will this help tilt polls in Trump's favor this time around?
Economy, of course, is a basic issue always in domestic politics, whether it be in India or in the United States. The inflation at the grocery store, as I've said, in gasoline, in regard to housing prices, are all salient issues. But the reality is that we have an economy in the United States which is the envy of the world right now. We've added more jobs than ever in the past. We've come in for the proverbial soft landing when many economists were predicting that what would happen is we would go into recession coming out of the pandemic. Stock market, even though it was down yesterday, is really at an all-time high. So the economy is very good overall. But the saliency of inflation for food, gasoline, and housing are issues that are going to cut in favor of Trump and against Kamala.
Mm-hmm. No, if polls are to be believed, Americans are unanimously favoring Trump's immigration policies. Now, his incendiary statements like immigrants eat Americans' cats and dogs. He's spoken about how America has become a garbage can because of immigrants that at this point of time are being allowed to infiltrate into the borders. That has not deterred Americans from supporting his immigration policy. Why is that?
I think that's a very good question. The reality is that we have been stressed by immigration. This is not just a phenomenon in the United States, but is worldwide. If you look at what's happening in Europe, immigration from the south to the north is caused by a number of factors. And this is unsettling to many. Unfortunately, Trump has been able to integrate this with the concerns which have historically been in the United States, which are racist in nature. And that has been the history from time to time, whether it was Irish immigrants or the Latin American immigrants that we have now. So it plays into basic fears which have been exacerbated by the language of of Trump, that these immigrants are coming to get you, to eat your pets, to take your jobs, to murder you in your own home. None of these are true, but as has been shown in the past, if you exaggerate enough, you have the big lie, and pound it enough, there is a large portion of the populace who will believe in that.
Right, absolutely. Now, Kamala Harris's pro-abortion campaign has also resonated with a lot of American women. Do you think that will be enough for her to win the election?
Well, it certainly will be enough to make it very, very close. As I say, I don't think that there is a clear leader at this time, but it is also very apparent that among women who have been Republican voters in the past, that the question of individual freedom of the woman to be able to control her own body is very salient and very important. Now, until the overturning of Roe versus Wade, we did not have a situation in which abortion rights, the rights of women, freedom to choose, were actually at issue. Now they're at an issue across the country, and in extreme cases in many states, and that's energized women across.
Right, absolutely. It has energized women for sure and brought them and standing together in favor of Harris. Now, Democrats have also targeted Trump over his Ukraine plan for a peace deal. Do you think a foreign policy is going to really impact how the Americans vote?
Yes, I think that that's a part of it, but I don't believe that that's going to really deter many people from getting to the polls. We're going to have a great turnout. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be so close that we won't know what the election outcome is and immediately, and that'll give scope for the conspiracy theories and the kinds of dislocations that we found on January the 6th, 2021, when a mob stormed the Capitol at the behest of Donald Trump.
Right, absolutely. All right, on that note, Mr. Raymond Vickery, thank you so much for joining me on the telecast. Up next, I have with me James Fannell. He is a former U.S. Naval Intelligence Officer. Of course, the first question, what are the key issues for the average American when he goes out to poll?
Well, the key issues, according to the polls, are, obviously the number one is the economy. Given the state of the economy in America in terms of inflation over the last 4 years, the cumulative effect of inflation that in that first year was up over 9% after just being around 1% under Trump. So the dramatic inflation of prices in America have really put a burden on the majority of Americans' ability to do the simple function of life, which is to be able to buy food, to provide shelter for their families, and care for the basic needs of not a life. So that's the number one issue. I think the other issue that's now, I think the polls are starting to indicate is the border security, and the fact that over the last 4 years of the Biden-Harris administration, the southern border and the northern border were essentially left open.
Right. Talking about poll projections, and they predict that the Americans trust Donald Trump more than Kamala Harris when it comes to the country's economy. Do you think this is actually going to result in more votes for Trump and perhaps the possibility of him winning the election?
Yes, I think the people have 4 years of experience with Trump. They remember it's not that long ago what the economy was like under President Trump before COVID hit. And so people understood that one of the key elements of the Trump policies, there's two key elements basically, which was the reduction in taxes, getting rid of taxes from people, and then also regulations in small business and business in general. So people were allowed to do capitalist things. They were allowed to buy and sell and trade and make new companies and to be creative and to make their fortunes if they would so choose. And that's kind of what the American way, as we say.
Why do you think Americans are favoring Trump's immigration policies as per poll projections? And on top of it, there are a lot of these incendiary statements that he has made. He's talked about, America has become a trash can because you're not able to check immigration. He's spoken about how immigrants are going to take your jobs. The crime rate has increased because of the immigrants. He's spoken about how immigrants are even going to eat your pets, your cats and dogs. And this has still not distanced people from disregarding Trump and his immigration policies. Why do you think that is?
Well, as I was saying, one of the key issues for Americans is the safety and security of their families in their own cities and towns across America. So the border has been left open. Up to 21 million people have come in from around the world. Many of these people are people that may have been pushed on America from other countries. We have examples of Venezuela opening up their prisons and things of that nature. So that's not to say everybody that came across is a criminal, but there are clearly criminal elements. In fact, the government's, this administration, the Biden-Harris administration's own FBI statistics and Homeland Security statistics indicate that there was literally hundreds of thousands of known criminals that are in the country, murderers, rapists, and other forms of crime that have come into the country. That scares Americans.
Right, absolutely. Now, Kamala Harris's pro-abortion campaign has resonated with the American women. Do you think this could cost Donald Trump the win that he is looking for?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with the premise that Harris's pro-abortion campaign has worked. There are many people in America that have strong religious views about abortion, equally as some have about what they claim is a woman's right. I think the Harris reliance upon this issue has got some flaws. First of all, the reversal of the Roe versus Wade court case from 50 years ago, the Dobbs decision under President Trump while he was president, and the Supreme Court made that ruling. Since that time, that did not change the basic status of abortion in America in terms of some national mandate. All it did was it said the decision for abortion regulations will be made by the states, which is consistent with the Constitution.
Now, Democrats have targeted Trump over his Ukraine plan for a peace deal. Now, do you think foreign policy really impacts how Americans are voting?
Well, traditionally, Americans do not place a high priority on foreign policy issues in elections. It's considered, but it's not one of the highest issues. It's, as I said, domestic issues like the economy, prices, domestic security, even this abortion issue. But I think in this case, people are still, there is a new movement in America, a new consensus between Republicans and former Democrats like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, who are saying, hey, we're tired of foreign wars, we're tired of the death and destruction. And so this issue of the war in Ukraine is now very serious because we have, the facts are over 1 million human beings have been killed in a war in the Ukraine. And Donald Trump and his party have now stood up and said, we're the party for peace. We're the party for ending wars and needless death.
Right. Now, do you feel that there is general sentiment amongst Americans that they do not want the country to participate in any more wars, whether it is the West Asia conflict or the Ukraine war or this conflict that is going on with China?
Yeah, there is definitely the statement is no more foreign wars, no more endless wars. And so, in a sense, America was fighting in the Middle East from Desert Storm in 1990, Desert Storm, up until the pullout in 2021, in August of 2021 out of Afghanistan. That was literally, 30 years of war America was conducting in the Middle East. And so people, trillions of dollars, many thousands of lives of Americans and more of other nations, countless lives, a lot of destruction, and then to watch the Biden-Harris administration just pull out unilaterally without consultation of their allies, without any commitment, or not commitment, but without any, a concerted effort to make sure that our allies in Afghanistan, the people that had helped us, and that our interests there were taken care of before we left. Pulling the military out before the civilians, very, very bad look, both internationally and domestically. And so I think Americans have had a lot of it, and they're sick and tired of what they consider to be foreign wars, and they don't want to be involved with them unless it attacks their vital national security interests.
Okay, let's go back 3 years, and it was January 6, 2021, the insurrection issue that has been used to attack Trump time and again in this election campaign as well. Now, Democrats have oftentimes called him fascist and a dictator and, likened him to Hitler. Trump, on the other hand, continues to defend himself, calling that particular day of insurrection as the day of love. In whose side will the voters sway?
I think that the Democrat Party has played for the last 4 years, or it's now, 3.5 years, the January 6th event, and they've gone to the well with that over and over again, and I think the American people recognize, again, there's been an exaggeration about the extent of the danger of January 6th. For instance, they never quote Donald Trump's full statements from that day where he told the crowd to peacefully protest, which was their First Amendment right. That never gets played on the mainstream media in America. They cut that part out. Now we find out also in the last 3.5 years that actually Donald Trump offered up troops to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and she rejected them. Troops that could have been used to make sure that the violence that occurred that day wouldn't have happened. Then there was the trial that was held in the Congress. That trial was violation of the history and precedent of the U.S. House of Representatives and the Congress, where they did not allow the Republican Party to choose their own members of that committee.
Now, if I were to ask you, is Trump likely to get the sympathy vote after the assassination bids on him, or did his rating soar momentarily when that incident happened and it really wouldn't make a difference in the way people vote?
I don't think it's a sympathy vote. I think Americans recognize with the numerous assassination attempts, they connect the dots, if you will. They can see that there is what appears to be almost a desperation by the other party, the Democrat Party, to prevent Trump from coming to office. He was impeached twice, which is unprecedented in American history. He's been indicted 92 times in several courts across the country for accusations of crimes that largely have been disproven. And then you have the constant barrage in the media on a daily basis across all the major media outlets. the New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, all of them attacking Donald Trump every day of the week. So the media is against him. So Americans have this sense that the system, the people that are in power, will do anything they can to stop President Trump from becoming president again. And in a way, Americans have a tradition of supporting the underdog, the person that's being unfairly treated. We like fairness. We like to see fair treatment.
Okay, how do you think the battle states are going to, in whose favor are they going to swing, and how are the residents of these battle states going to vote? As of today, polls are predicting that there are 4 states where Trump has the edge, while the other 3 is where Harris has the lead.
Yeah, at this point, I don't trust polls. I know the polls you're talking about. I can find other polls that say Trump's up in all of the 7 battleground states. I can find polls that say that Harris is. So polls have been historically wrong, but I can say to you that when you compare where Trump was in relationship to Biden in 2020, where he was in relationship to Hillary Clinton in 2016, Trump is now, you could say, if you want to use public polling, he's equal to them, equal to Harris. It's an equal race. But in previous races where Trump narrowly lost in 2020 or won in 2016, Trump was greatly behind Clinton and Biden. So you may want to, you could say that it's possible that Trump is going to be very much ahead on November 5th, at least based on that trajectory and that comparison with the relationship with the Clinton race and the Biden race.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Captain James Fannell, for joining me on the telecast. And on that note, I slip into a short break. Thanks for watching NewsX. This is in the run-up to the US elections on the November 5th. We will bring you daily at 7:30 p.m. on weekdays this special telecast with voices from America, analysts, journalists, a number of VIP speakers, and what do they think and how they dissect the poll numbers. How do they think are the people of America going to vote? Thanks for watching.
कभी नाच गाना और बेहतरीन खाना, कभी सास बहू की नोक-झोंक में स्वाद का मुस्कुराना, कभी रिश्तों में मुस्कुराहट और स्वाद भरना। असली मसालों का उपहार MDH बनाए खास हर त्योहार,
क्योंकि हर रिश्ता है स्वाद से जुड़ा।
आइए मनाएं खुशियों की दीपावली।